Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to our talk titled Mindanao Voices, which focuses on, which is part of our talk series with a regional focus. Please read the guidelines on screen. No? We'd like to thank our education partners, Ateneo Art Gallery, Museum Foundation of the Philippines, and the Embassy of Embassy of Spain in the Philippines. So today we have a panel titled Regional Focus Mindanao Voices. Our moderator for this afternoon is Professor Tessa Maria Guanzon. She's an educator, writer, and contemporary art curator based in Manila, the Philippines. Her curatorial and research interests center on contemporary art practices in Southeast Asia and arts mediation for the public sphere. Her most recent research and curatorial projects include the Southeast Asia Neighborhoods Network, CNET, organized by the International Institute of Asian Studies, Leiden, the Netherlands, and funded by the Luz Foundation, New York. The traveling exhibition Notes for Tomorrow, organized by the ICI International, or Independent Curators International, New York, and the Philippine Pavilion at the 58th Venice Art Biennale. She's been invited to the Interlocutors Program of the 10th Pacific Triennial, organized by the Queensland Art Gallery and Gallery of Modern Art in Brisbane, Australia, and to the curatorial team of the 2021 Asian Art Biennial at the National Museum of Fine Arts in Taichung, Taiwan. We're very pleased to have Tessa with us this afternoon moderating the panel on Mindanao art. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues and friends. Thank you for the introduction, Bin. When I met Tricky Lopa at the preview of the exhibition at the Ayala Triangle Gardens, she reminded me of the time when I wrote on Gabi Barredo's piece for the inaugural edition of Art Fair Philippines. So Art Fair Philippines has indeed flourished because that was nearly a decade ago now. Congratulations to the organizers. Welcome to nearly a decade now. So welcome to Mindanao Voices, the third segment of a series of talks that center on art from the regions. I will be moderating today's discussion on contemporary art from Mindanao. We are joined by three speakers, all of them immersed in the ecology of art that is located in and framed by the Mindanao region. The last big exhibition I curated before the pandemic hit was the 4th edition of the artist-led festival, Panit Pukog. I worked closely with Cris Rollo, who's joining us today, Errol Balcos, and the many artist friends and colleagues I met in the cities we visited. Davao, Cagayan de Oro, Iligan, Pagadian, General Santos, Zamboanga. So the bus rides were grueling, but our discussions were gratifying. It was also a welcome respite from the chaos of Venice. So I felt that the exhibitions and the events organized for the festival, Panit Bukog, were just the beginning of a conversation we should continue to cultivate. I posed 3 questions to our speakers, and I felt these would help frame our understanding of what we name as Mindanao contemporary art or contemporary art from Mindanao, or more fittingly, the Mindanao art world. I wanted them to acquaint us with the dynamic and ever-changing landscape of Mindanao contemporary art. So those questions were, what significant platforms, organizations, or collectives are there in Mindanao at the moment? How do they support contemporary art production and circulation, and in turn shape what we know about contemporary art from Mindanao? And what kind of support do you think should be given to the regional art scene, specifically in Mindanao, so that it continues to flourish? So Dindin earlier shared our guidelines. So let me remind our audience and participants to mute their microphones while they are not speaking. We will have 15-minute presentations from our speakers, followed by a brief conversation between us. We will then welcome questions from your end, our audience, and you may course them through the chat feature on Zoom, or you can use the raise hand function if you wish to speak. Let us try our best to keep the time, and let us think through our comments and questions so they remain relevant to the discussion. I also remind our speakers to pay attention to the message sent them by our Art Fair Philippines staff. These are reminders on the time left for your discussion. So let me now introduce our speakers. I will make the introductions all together and their presentations will follow by turns. Abraham Garcia Jr. takes on many roles as an art worker. He is a practicing artist, an art educator, and an organizer of art projects. His curatorial interest focuses on recent art practices in Mindanao. He is currently a doctoral researcher at the Queensland College of Art of Griffith University, where he also completed his Master of Visual Arts in 2011. Abe explores changing translocal Filipino identities as migrants through photographic art practice. His other interests include outreach and cross-border artistic engagements with Mindanao's neighbors, Borneo, Brunei, and East Indonesia. He was part of the curatorial team of the 2013 Singapore Biennale If the World Changed, and was an artist curator for Mindanao in the 2003 Sungduan Making the Local project. Cris Rollo is currently the Philippines Country Program Manager of the United Nations Human Settlements Program, or UN Habitat. He is also a visual artist, a curator, and a writer. As a development worker, he consciously integrates these two spheres in his work. He was a member of the panel of consulting experts for the Philippine Heritage Charter for heritage sites and spaces and their associated environments of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts in 2020. He was Deputy Director for Programs of the Metropolitan Museum of Manila from 2005 to 2006, the National Chair of the Committee on Visual Arts of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts from 2000 to 2006, and a member of the NCCA National Advisory Board. Cris received his AB Economics degree from the Ateneo de Manila University and his Master in Business Management from the Asian Institute of Management and participated in an exchange program at McGill University on a full scholarship. Bing Cariño is a visual artist, a theater director, an interior designer, an educator, and curator. He graduated with a degree in interior design from the University of the Philippines and is currently pursuing his master's degree in culture and art studies at the Mindanao State University, Iligan Institute of Technology. He was a 3-term executive committee member of the 2 national committees of the NCCA. So he served 1 term with the National Committee on Visual Arts and 2 terms with the National Committee on Cultural Education. He curates performing arts, ethnographic, and visual art exhibitions and has curated for museums in Mindanao and for Lawig Diwa, including the Mindanao Art Fair. He is the artistic director of Mindanao's foremost contemporary dance company, the MMC Teatro Ambahanon. He is currently the cultural officer of the Ramon Magsaysay Memorial Colleges, both in Coronadal and General Santos City, where he is also a full-time faculty. Let us all welcome Abe, Cris, and Bing.
Okay. Good afternoon. Can we go to the first slide, please? Okay. So my presentation today would be related to ideas that engage place and place that influences ideas. Can you show the second slide, please? So there will be 4 topics that will be discussed. The first topic will be on the social value of art practices and the intercultural relations of peoples in Mindanao. The second will be about the makings in contemporary art in Mindanao. The third will be on being organized as local art communities. And the last one is engaging the Mindanao publics to identify themselves as part of the region. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so the first slide talks about the social value of art practices and intercultural relations of people. So I begin my engagement with Mindanao through my personal encounters after being reintroduced back to my home region after being an art student for 8 years in Luzon and Metro Manila. So my experience going back to Mindanao was very interdisciplinary through the music of Joey Ayala and Bagong Lumad, Gary Granada, hanging out with the office of Mindulani and the Kaliwa Theater Collective. For Mindanao was a very strong dance theater movement in the 1990s, and working as a development worker for the Alternate Forum for Research in Mindanao, where I first interacted with Davao-based visual artists. So what I learned from that encounter was that the Mindanao region has a very complex social condition in relation to articulating the culture of peace in the region, where you deal with diverse peoples. There is the overlapping histories of indigenous, the colonizer, settler, and the new Mindanaoans that especially that are born in the 20th century. The third is the interactions expresses solidarity, or it causes ongoing violence and conflict, displacement, or relocations related to land that affect the underdevelopment or the development of the regions. And the conditions on these lands either stifle or generate artistic production that tell of the living heritage and more recent views of ourselves in the traditional and contemporary realms. Usually, the traditional are seen in rural or town settings, while the latter are more in the urban settings. And one of the unique things that I found in art openings and art events is also an opportunity to showcase the local culture of the place. The next slide, please. Okay, now we go to making in contemporary art. My early experiences with contemporary art was mentored by Roberto Fileo and experiencing his work in Comité de Festejos with the late Bobby Valenzuela and Hiraya Gallery, Jose Tensi Ruiz and Antonio Austria as mentors in the fine arts program, and seeing the works of the late Santiago Bose, Emelda Cahipe and Daya, Manny Garibay for starters. And what I learned from this is how do you translate these expressions back in Davao and Mindanao. One of the things that I noticed is that a lot of artists, when they start an art practice, the region has a very strong, it's strongly, a lot of contemporary artists appropriate Lumad and Moro motifs, either for solidarity or in reciprocal collaborative undertakings that place the invisibility and visibility of indigenous participants with directed engagements by contemporary artists and even designers. And of course, the recent Panit Bukog 4, where it is good to see that visual artists are now expanding practices into wall-based installation, drawing, sculptures, video drawing, and performance. digital image, and multi or mixed media works. It reminds us that ideas are not just expressed in words or text, but are visualized through material exploration and forms generated as outcomes of this process. Of course, painting will never fade. And I see in a lot of emerging artists, they like to play on the malleability of the image, where they use a collage of found images, montage, among others, where I felt that being digital natives has an effect on this practice. Next slide, please. Another I'd like to share is about the importance of being organized as local art communities, where I was inspired by Brenda Fajardo and her fellow art educators in Paella, and able to participate in my earliest Viva in Iloilo and the Baguio Arts Festival in the mid-1990s. These are continuing engagements from Davao to any point in Mindanao. So it's very important to create peer communities as members of art groups and exhibiting together on project basis. And I'm happy that we developed intercity provincial engagements and local curatorship through the Panit Bukog projects that began in year 2000 and continued to the last iteration in 2019. The state-sponsored Mindanao Art Best project in Zamboanga City at the Gallery of the Peninsula and the Archipelago. And it's also good that practitioners in Mindanao also met their counterparts in NCR Luzon and the Visayas through the curated Sumduan projects. The locations are Davao, Cagayan de Oro, Dipolog cities. The latter, Sumduans, were mentored under Dr. Practic Flores in also developing local artist curators. And arts and artist engagements are also source of magnets. So I said earlier that the Panit Bukog project started by the Oral Art Guild and Mixed Media Art Group in year 2001. In 2001, we were all under the mentorship of the late Bobby Valenzuela that helped us initially develop local curatorship. And it became a 3-city traveling exhibit with the Davao Artist Foundation in 2001. Though it reverted back to the 2 art groups in 2002. And of course, fast forward 17 years later, the last iteration was curated by Ms. Tessa Guanzon, Cris Rollo, and Errol Balcos, that was participated by a constellation of artists from 8 to 9 locations, not bounded by art groups. And the takeaway of these engagements is to develop critical distance from the artist's works, learn to live with critique, and do better attempts in art making. One of the things that I also experienced is to also create engagements with our Southeast Asian neighbors, where we were able to mount a Mindanao Art Community and Sabah Art Community project in 2017 at the Gallery of the Peninsula and the Archipelago. So that was a good exhibition, and it was also simultaneously with a state-sponsored Budayao Festival of Cultures in General Santos City in 2017, Kuching in 2019, and the online version in Brunei in 2021. Of course, it was also good to also work with. This was a result of the engagement I had with the Singapore Biennale 2013, If the World Changed. So the takeaway of this nurturing of artistic relations is that it will be valuable in decades to come to further do artist engagements. The other one is the next slide, please. So it's about the continuing art education, and artist engagements are important component of art spaces, galleries, and museums. So besides the Davao-based fine art and design schools of PWC Davao, UM-CAFA, and the defunct Ford Academy of the Arts, there are also emerging artists that are graduates from Cebu and Metro-based universities, Some studied in the Philippine High School for the Arts. Others were also developed through the special program of the arts in the national high schools. So in the 1990s, most of the artists are self-taught and independently taught. Most came from drafting schools and developed their art practices through peer interaction through art groups. And of course, there are also spaces. In the 1990s to early 2000s, most of the artsy spaces are artist-initiated spaces. But more recently, we have a lot of events. For example, in Davao, you have Art Hunt Davao, an art store that converts to an art gallery, the Morning Light, galleries like Bintana, Art Portal, which we partnered here in the Art Fair Philippines. We also have the newly local galleries, the Bauhaus and the Gallery Down South, among others. And of course, there are also institutional spaces like the university campuses of Xavier University. They have the Museo de Oro and Ateneo de Zamboanga University's Gallery of the Peninsula and the Archipelago. And the last slide, please. And the last slide is the most important, is that we don't forget the Mindanao publics to identify themselves as part of the region. Even the artworks, even though the artworks are presented with ambiguity, but it generates many responses from its audience and premise that this makes them aware that it is coming from the Mindanao region. So this is a challenge for the artist community and even those that own spaces, is how do you make your audience curious? How do you nurture their sense of wonder? And how do you tell the story of Mindanao? So with that, I will end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Hindi pa ako. Good afternoon. I'm Bing Cariño. I'm an independent curator, as I was introduced early. Now I'm an interior designer, so I started as exhibition designer, and because of the maybe dearth of curators in South, it's only Abe who is my exhibition design was its involvement evolved into curation. I used to curate graphic materials because I collect them. As a teacher, we lack museums in our area in General Santos City. So I collect materials, and usually I mount exhibits during festivals and school activities. I also curate historical materials. This is on the history of General Santos City. And yeah, I curate also for the visual arts, and this was the exhibit of Kublai Milian in CCA Gallery. I also curated this when the Marawi siege was over. Xavier Ateneo in Cagayan de Oro mounted this exhibition. So it's an art exhibit that dialogues with materials from Marawi. Lately, I was down with COVID, and when I recovered, I immediately went back to the practice. I started painting, and then curated pop-up exhibits. And this was my exhibit. And after that, I curated the two women exhibit also in the mall. And for the Cultural Center of the Philippines, we did collaborative work. It is a CCP Innovation Grant where we work with dancers producing dance films. And I work with Noy Narciso and filmmaker Teng Mangansakan, dancers of Teatro Ambahanan, into this. The title of the work is "The Dancers Are Absent, but the Dance Is Not." So it is a response to COVID, where limited physical engagement was enforced. No, spaces are closed. So this time, to limit interaction with audience, the dancer made dance films, and so the audience will see the dance but not interact with the dancers, solving the limited audience interaction. These are the in basically the problem in the South is the lack of spaces for presenting art. So as you can use the dance studios and the spaces in the mall. So what I'm is my involvement with Mindanao Art Fair. It is 3 years old. It's an annual art fair of Mindanao galleries. No? So how an art fair builds spaces for art and art production in Mindanao. That's basically the what I saw in this project. Mindanao Art Fair is funded by the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, National Committee on Art Galleries, and Lawig Diva is an art organization in Davao. They were once a research organization, and now it's because it's under Emilian, visual artist. The organization proposed for the first Mindanao Art Fair that was in 2019. So in 2019, we had this traversing the rivers of creativity, and we only have 10 spaces, no, only 5 galleries, and the rest of the participating groups are regional art groups. No, supposedly, ang nire-require ng NCCA is 10 galleries. No? So sabi ko nga na merong dearth and what's this, absence, if not a limitation of spaces that deals with art presentation, visual art presentation. So to fill up the space, we invited art groups. But my engagement in the art fair was with art talks. No, we organized a conference to this is the first art fair. No? It's in the atrium of a mall, and as you can see, we don't have enough space to present the 10 galleries that joined us. In 2020, we were supposed to have the second Mindanao Art Fair, but what's this? COVID happened, so there was a change in the plans. We titled it "Art in the New Life." It's it also work around COVID restrictions. So we found a space that can hold it safely. It's in the lobby of Malayan College in Davao, and the rest of the participation from the regions are online. So the second art fair is a bigger, with 200 artists participating. Ang maganda nito, artists did not have to come from the regions to go to Davao to present. So only digital museums were set up, and the art groups and galleries from the region set up their physical exhibits in their towns. We included artworks from and we also included an art project that we artists created a wash basin that were distributed to places in Davao. So that's like bringing the art to spaces with COVID restrictions. And it's still under COVID, but already allowed physical. So there's an ongoing construction na isang mall sa Davao, which is Poblacion. And since it's not yet occupied, the owners lent the space to the art fair. So we had a better home this time. So there are many exhibits from different art groups participating. They were given spaces in the new mall. So these are the exhibits in the most recent art fair. So we moved from a cramped space inside to a school in Davao that has a space that can accommodate us to a work in progress na architecture where a bigger and longer art fair was held. This was ongoing for a month because the lines are long. It's still in COVID, and to work around it is that we art fair for a month. So it's a blockbuster. We have 200 visitors a day, and that's what the venue can allow. After this, the Lawig Diwa felt that there is a need for education and mentoring program for artists. So off schedule, because that happens at the last quarter of the year. During off season, we hold regional art mentoring at Balay Kalipay in Davao City. So regional art groups sent 30 to 40 young artists. There's a mentoring program. Thus in the mentoring program, we select artists for residencies, and they are now working on projects for the next art fair. So pinakalas namin project is this, with the Art Fair Philippines. We had a physical exhibit in the same venue where we held the last art fair. Thank you.
Hi, Chris. Can you hear us? Can you please unmute your mic? Are you on your mobile? There should be a button that looks like a tiny microphone on the left lower corner. We will try to send you a prompt via Zoom that will say something like we're requesting to unmute you.
Cris, do you see that tap to speak button? Yeah.
Cris, maybe you can try to unmute Chris as a host. Di ba pwede
Yes,
yan?
we've
Yeah.
been sending him prompts. He has to accept it from his end.
Chris, while Chris is trying to figure out all the technical details of uh, the sounds, maybe we can just show his slides. So perhaps while awaiting for Chris, we can go over his lives. And this is a project that we did in 2019 with Errol Balcos and the many artists and colleagues and friends from Mindanao. Okay. So panit bukog means skin and bones, and I think there's also a slide there which explains its origin. So what happened back then is we traveled to different cities, as I earlier mentioned, and we talked to artists, and in the end, we had to choose works from artists to be included in 3 exhibitions in Cagayan de Oro City. So this is a non-selling show. Artists presented their portfolio to us, explained their works and their practices to us. So that was a good exercise. And true to its origins, Panit Bukog is an artist-led project. So it's a multi-site. Cris, can we go back to that slide first? So it's a multi-site exhibition. It started as a traveling exhibit, and it was held every year from 2000 up until 2002. And then it was revived in 2019, but the pandemic hit. So there. So all the venues and activities in for Panit Bukog are based happened in Mindanao. Sige, next slide, please. So Cris had a great role in initiating, alongside the early artists who organized the first few exhibitions. But I remember him telling me that he had to also write about it, which was a good way to really document the initiative. So in 2000, he said there were 12 artists, 2 curators for Iligan and Cagayan de Oro, and 2 venues. So artists are key to developing the local art scene. And I think that was also quite prominent in the discussions by Bing and Abe. Yes, there are many local curators. And in the 2019 edition, we had several participants in a curatorial workshop. But that workshop also allowed them to work with the collection of a university museum. But Cris also noted that in 2000, there was a need to improve art practices and presentation. I will leave it to him to explain later what this need for improvement means, and the need to develop exhibition spaces. Next slide, please. For Panit Bukog 2, there were 3 venues and 28 artists and a sole curator. The outside expertise of a curator is available and can significantly contribute to understanding local art practices. External support is key to developing new networks, exposure, and links to the market. So I think this was Bobby Valenzuela, right? In the photograph, in the lower left photograph. Okay, next slide, please. For the third Panit Bukog, there were fewer artists, still 2 venues, and I think this is a good experiment. This was curated by a group of artists. Okay, so networks were sustained, but platforms require commitment and resources. I think this is a common problem among collectives or artist-led organizations or artist initiatives. Often you start off with great energy, but at some point we lose steam, maybe because the demands of organizing a project and realizing it, they are great, or the demands are great. So the local audience takes time to appreciate contemporary art, but there is a rich unexplored market. So I see Errol in the photographs, Nick Akatu. Okay, next slide, please. So for the Panit Bukog 4, we had 43 artists. It's a team of curators, myself, Cris, and Errol, and 3 venues in one city, in Cagayan de Oro City. So it is notable that these 2 venues are galleries inside university museums. Okay, so the concept for Panit Bukog can be transformed and can emerge again, institutional support is key, no? In realizing the project, because we had to rely on resources for field work, for research, for network development, and for artists to be able to show their works in these exhibition spaces. Okay. I think Cris also noted that appropriate and adequate support is needed to leverage local resources. This is quite important, no? Local resources. I think part of our efforts for Panit Bukog 4 was to talk to local partners, no, to help realize events. So there were 3 exhibitions and several workshops and talks. Okay, next slide, please. I think Cris prepared, all right, so we had a lot of activities, all the Panit, I think here we see activities that we did when we visited the cities. There were a lot of young artists. The bus rides were difficult, but the conversations were very engaging and informative, especially for me, who is not from the region. We also had a curatorial workshop, and there was a diverse mix of participants, artists themselves, cultural workers, museum workers, and the workshop allowed them to work with the collection of the Capital University Museum of Three Cultures. Okay, next slide, please. All right, this is a very good matrix that Cris prepared. No? And here he summarized the challenges that the Mindanao art world faces. No? Factions within geographical areas. One challenge would be that many of these are mainly homegrown, self-taught artists. Well, it can be both a challenge and an advantage, I think. Limited networks with artists from other regions, particularly in the NCR, Luzon, and Visayas. The art market, Cris mentions that it is small and based largely on personal networks, few professionally managed art galleries, inaccessible exhibition spaces in school compounds or private properties. I think this is a challenge that being also noted, a limited exposure at the local, national, and international levels, right? And he lists down this kind of support needed for contemporary art to flourish in Mindanao. Capacity development for art organizations, strengthening of artist networks across regions. Cris and I were often in discussion over this, like how can we possibly grow a network of, say, artist organizations or even residency spaces, no, across the regions. The regional art fairs, continued support for the regional art fairs and capacity development for art spaces to promote regional art fairs, regional art in fairs and government-supported platforms, to give incentives to exhibition spaces. I think this is also quite important. Capacity development support for art writers and critics. How do we generate knowledge about contemporary art from Mindanao? Scholarships or residencies for artists, and private sector support for the arts. And how can this be given incentives? I don't know if I did justice to the matrix. Maybe later, if Cris is able to join us, he can explain some of these points better. So is this the last slide, Cris?
Yes, this is the last slide.
Can we check if Cris is able to join us? So maybe he can share a few notes on that will better explain some of the slides. All right. I noted a few ideas from the 3 presentations. Abe noted the impulses of making contemporary art in Mindanao and noted the impetus, these impetus as including the many local cultures that are in the region or that define the region, and the need for peace and development in the region. He also mentioned, I think all three of them mentioned the centrality of artist groups and artist organizations, which I also noted when we worked on the fourth edition of the Panit Bukog. So the artist organizations are quite central to mobilizing exhibitions and events related to contemporary art in the Mindanao region. But while artist organizations or artist groups or even collectives exist, we cannot deny that, factions also exist. And sometimes as a curator coming from outside Mindanao, you are not readily aware of all these tensions and dynamics between the groups. But yes, it's important that we also consider that. It's both a potential and can sometimes be a disadvantage, but it exists, and we have to recognize that kind of tension as something that can probably enrich the Mindanao contemporary art scene. Being noted the lack of exhibit spaces, and he also noted that hybrid formats were later adapted for the more recent editions of Mindanao Art Fair. But then again, to my mind, I'm thinking, okay, perhaps the kind of exhibitions we do may not be just confined to galleries. So the lack of what we know as traditional spaces for the arts can also be an encouragement to look for other spaces where exhibitions can take on quite different formats, meaning probably these can be long-term engagements with communities. These are not limited to wall-bound or perhaps collectible artworks. So in that way, the lack can be a potential for experimentation, or an encouragement to experiment in the way we understand what the exhibitionary means. In using these hybrid formats, perhaps we, as curators, as culture advocates, as organizers of art events, we can also think about how do we really reach out to non-art world communities or non-art world audiences, because I think access remains a very pertinent concern. Often we would measure the success of an exhibition by, I remember saying this is a blockbuster exhibition because we have this great number of attendees. But when we really think about it, is it really just the number of attendees we should preoccupy ourselves with? What kind of experiences do we offer? And how do we develop new metrics for gauging audience interaction with the works? So maybe it's something we can challenge ourselves to do. Baka hindi lang yung number of attendees ang pwede nating pagtuunan ng pansin, kung hindi ano bang klaseng karanasan yung inihahain ng ating ng exhibitions na kinukurate natin sa audiences. Residencies are also interesting platforms. I noticed that in the last 2 years, Art Fair Philippines has also launched residencies. Mentorships are also quite important, but I think we should also rethink what kind of mentor-mentee relationships do we encourage? Do we encourage a replication of an art practice? Do we encourage experimentation? Do we allow the young artists to develop their own voices through the residencies? So I think the residencies can also be complemented with, a kind of a discussion group wherein all the participants can rethink their roles, in such a platform or a system of, I would call it a way of working together, that tries to debunk the hierarchical systems inherent to the art world. Cris also presented this very good matrix, which I think can be useful for policy. So that's my way of summarizing some of the ideas you presented. To start off, maybe I can start with a question which the three of you or even Dindin can answer. Okay. The often heard sentiment from artists when I travel to regions to do research or fieldwork or even curate exhibitions is that this is an often heard sentiment is everything is centered in Manila, or that the Philippine contemporary art scene is indeed Manila-centric. And this is something I recall hearing from those I met in Davao in 2019. And this is echoed in many other contexts, no? If there is such a sentiment, what can you say about such a sentiment? And if this sentiment exists, how do we avoid replicating it in the regions? Say, for example, for events to not be centered in the big city centers like Davao or even Cagayan de Oro City. I understand that these big cities would have the infrastructure for the exhibitions, right? But I wonder whether a model like the first edition of the Panit Bukog of the traveling exhibition, which is artist-led or even community-led, is possible. So may I know your thoughts about this? Okay. Bing, I saw you raise your hand, so maybe you can begin.
Okay. Paano ba siya? Yung Manila-centric, no, I think is actually an opportunity for local growth. Now, ang problema kasi like in contemporary dance, it's very difficult to bring artists to Manila. No, so yung pagiging Manila-centric actually will work for regional people kasi they don't have to think about it. Kaya palagi ko sinasabi, Manila is not the clearinghouse of the arts. No, so it can happen. It can happen in Viva, no, wherein the local expressions can flourish. Yun lang nga ang isa kasi sa mga problem while we wanted and siguro to Manila is the market. No, kasi there's a dearth of siguro buyers of our industry, no, sa South. Pero kung presentation, I think opportunity ding inaccessible yung kasi we are an archipelago, no, maganda na rin lang sigurong i-cultivate yung lokal. Okay, even in Mindanao where isa na lang sana yan ka-island, mahirap din i-move ang people around, no? Especially na malaki rin yung Mindanao. So maganda na merong faction so that somehow there kesa sa maglagay ng isang central where people naman cannot like go and participate, no? Kaya nga magandang nangyari ang pandemic because tan tayong wag magsama-sama. And then tuloy maraming like in the Mindanao Art Fair, there are so many initiatives na nangyari sa local. So ngayon the audience for the art sa amin. Kasi nandyan yung connectivity ng virtual, pero yung local hindi ma-alienate because their own artists are exhibiting in their own localities. So I think good dyan, no? It can work well positively for the local.
Thank you, Bing. Yeah. Yes, Dindin.
Actually, well, maybe I can also explain in behalf of the art fair. No, I think one of the advantage of having a website, no, is we're able to work with other organizations and galleries outside of Metro Manila. So that's why this year we decided to introduce a regional focus, and we were able to talk to like a group in Baguio, the Ibagyo Arts Festival, and then we were also able to talk to Manny Montelibano for Viva Excon, the Sun Bacolod, and then of course Panit Bukog through Abe Errol, and then Lawig Diwa with Kublai, Bing, and Jeff. No? So the idea really was to see if we can help, I guess, create a market for the works in the regions, because you don't really have collectors. No? Um, uh, and then also, interestingly, uh, the works from the regions are the shows, the festivals, and the groups from the regions all work with curators. So that was also interesting, no? Because the works, at least it is it shows, I guess, what a model for what type of exhibitions can be shown through an art fair. No? I mean, they're well curated shows. No? So I don't know. Maybe, well, we have a feedback form that we're giving out to all the participants. So hopefully we can get your comments to see how we can help you, how we can work more closely for the future. I think this also refers to what Abe said. I noticed when you organize as an art community, it leads to intercity provincial engagements. So I'm thinking that maybe this was an opportunity or an example for that. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Okay. Abe, may I know your thoughts?
Yeah.
Okay, so ang maganda, the one thing that I like about Panit Bukog 4 is that kasi yung first Panit Bukog 1, 2, and 3 were all attached to art groups. So yun yung ano niya. Pero it's a good thing that though we didn't have a traveling exhibit for the last one, pero it opened it up to emerging artists na not associated with art groups. So I think that was a very plus factor. Tapos the Tri-City venue was nice as well because you get different spaces, and even though it's only in Cagayan, you get different publics that go to these places. So you have dalawang university based but still two different characters na museums. Tapos you got a mall in sa SM Downtown Premier. And the good thing about it is maybe compared to NCR-based galleries na short-term yung exhibition, and we got a whole month, di ba? I remember the whole month of November for that. Wow, sabi ko, SM, isang buwan. So that's a very plus factor, no? Tapos, hindi ka pa, actually, this is my first time na to help out in the curatorial assistance for an online exhibit. Though maganda nga yung hybrid in terms of the pandemic because katulad nung pag-mount ng physical exhibition sa Museo de Oro for Langgikit, we really had a hard time kasi nga hindi lahat ng artists online lagi, so you have to call them via voice call and follow up on their art profiles, on their images. Tapos yung core team din, hindi rin lahat naka-base sa city. So yan yung problem din when you're based in provinces and in towns na yung signal ng data hindi ganoon ka kahit nga yung mga taga-art portal rin na nasa Marinduque sila, then you have Errol and Bukidnon. Then, so yun siya. So mabuti na lang. Sabi ko, ay nako, salamat sa prepaid call dito sa Brisbane. I could call everybody for free. So parang yun yung arrangement. Tapos, in terms of dynamics, I think it's a given reality. Yung dynamics. So how do you make it work for the region? One of the things that the dynamics is to test your visions, no? Yung kanya-kanyang grupo, kanya-kanyang kanya-kanyang initiatives. At least there's those communities that are active in the local art scene, and you could test those visions through exhibitions, through projects, mentoring program or residencies, ganun siya. Tapos ang lagi kong sinasabi din, yung balik na dun sa first question about laging Manila-centric, I always remind them sa mga artists sa mga previous projects that the National Capital Region is also a region. Likewise, the Luzon and the Visayas is also a region. So meron siyang sariling flavor ng artworks. Yun lang nga, mostly nga ang kung gusto nilang mag-sell ng works, it redounds back to the personal network of the artist. So maybe laging siguro part ng Art Fair Philippines or yung nationwide na focus ng mga art fairs, maybe dapat meron talagang regional support lagi yung component yung program. So
Yeah, so to pursue that thought, I wonder, and perhaps I will address this to Dindin and the organizers of the Art Fair Philippines, what other support systems can the art market and a platform like the Art Fair, which is primarily market-oriented, what do you think, what kind of support systems can you give to the local art scene, especially those in the regions, for initiatives that are not directly associated to the market? Because often young artists would be preoccupied with how do I succeed in the market? And that becomes, the primary preoccupation. And sometimes, well, it can be a good thing, but it can also be a trap, right? So I wonder how a platform like the Art Fair Philippines can give support to other initiatives, like, for example, would the residencies extend beyond the residency itself? Does it develop into a full-blown exhibition that is not, these are not directly market-oriented initiatives, no? Kasi I asked this question because in a recent lecture sa Sablayan, sa Mindoro, ganun din yung tanong ng isang batang artist sa akin, how do I show in a gallery, or how do I, how do I succeed in the market? But the market is not the only avenue, for artworks. So I wonder how Art Fair Philippines can expand its support to projects or initiatives not directly associated to the market. Yeah, just very briefly, Ding.
What I can think of to answer your question would be, well, we have a talks program that like we have a talks program like what's happening now. So we get a mixed group of people with different experiences that come to listen to the different talks that we have. No, so for example, for the regional focus, we had one that was moderated by Leslie de Chavez, and then Marika Constantino and the Panay Voices, and then now we're having the Mindanao Voices. No, and then as for the residencies program, that also came about because well, we had a sponsor that wanted to shift into out of, well, from an art competition, and this having the residencies program also seemed more relevant, no, at the time, like, during the pandemic, with people, with artists wanting to go elsewhere to, let's say, to maybe deepen their art practices. No, a lot of the programs that we do are also dependent on sponsorship money, right? So I don't know if that answers your question, even. No? So that's what we have at the moment. So, well, we have another year for the residencies program. So let's see, hopefully we'll have a third year for that. But definitely the sponsor came in for year 2. We're going to be maintaining the same residency programs for now. And then, well, hopefully we can have more, we can feature more talks about what is happening in the regions, also to help bring awareness to the programs outside NCR. So far, I don't know if does that answer your question. Yeah.
It does. Siguro lang, kaya ako siya itinanong kasi siguro it becomes imperative after the pandemic hit that we commit ourselves to long-term engagements, especially with local art communities, meaning it doesn't end with the annual edition of the fair or it
Yeah.
doesn't end with a big festival or an exhibition, but I hope it's a relationship that we can sustain over a longer period of time. So I will read through some of the questions in the Q&A box. Cris has answered a few of them for us. Thank you, Cris. So the question is, how can we empower traditional arts with perhaps the growing attention to contemporary art this time, no? Or the Lilay used the term modern art right now. So Cris said, we can promote interaction between traditional and modern artists so they can cross-fertilize and grow together. Yes, this is also a very good opportunity. Engagement with local art communities or local communities which are not, part of the art world. But this kind of initiative, again, as I said, and as many artists whose practice are oriented that way, it takes time and it doesn't happen overnight. And there's a need for, as the slides presented by Cris noted, there's a need for commitment and immersion. And yeah, this needs to happen over time. Okay. Okay, so the emphasis on regional art has been underscored by the series of art talks for Art Fair Philippines. And I noticed that members of the panel, even Din is also an educator. No? As educators, how do you think can we sharpen our understanding of contemporary art from the regions? I recall that when the senior high school was introduced, there is a course called Contemporary Art from the Regions, right? In our efforts to be expansive, we strive to include as many art from the regions, but I guess it shouldn't end there, yung token inclusion of artists from the regions. We strive to include as many representative art from the regions in our teaching modules, our writing, and our exhibitions. In teaching, how do we then approach this framing of art from the regions? How do you think? What do you think is the best approach, so that we are both expansive, but we are also quite specific? If I hope that is clear. So hindi lang inclusion yung concern natin, but also parang a fine-grained approach, to a locality, kasi madalas nating naririnig na okay, the local is very important, etc. But say for example, how do we teach about it? When I did Panit Bukog 4, I'm also a stranger, to the region. I was a stranger to that kind of art scene. But what kind of lens or what kind of viewpoint can we bring to such contexts as educators? Sige. Bing, would you like to start? So this is a panel of, Abby called it hyphenated, multi-hyphenated practitioners. So we know that they're all quite immersed, in the local art scenes they are part of. But as educators, what do you think can be done so that we can sharpen our understanding of art from the regions?
I think remember that there's a lengthy conversation about tradition and contemporary before. Because I'm a teacher and I'm quite confused with the contemporary art in the region, and it included the works of the Gama ba. Sabi nga nila, even kay Patrick noon, because there is a continuity from tradition to the now, so it's considered contemporary. Ang iba naman sinabi, it's the engagement, that temporary, parang engagement of the traditional to the mainstream. Pero how do you teach that? Kasi ang iba pag ano nga yung if you teach this, the work of the traditional masters are contemporary, kasi contemporary. parang nag-iba, no? Like what we see in contemporary, in the canons. Na yun, I have a difficulty navigating it, especially na yung thought na dahil continuing siya from its original function to contemporary. Yun. Tapos meron ang difficulty of yung appropriation na tinatawag. When is it supposed to be used? No? Like a contemporary, non-traditional, non-IP would appropriate the motifs, no? Pero kung pag-aralan natin ng social sciences, na when two meet, of course there will be mutual what's the exchange, no? So there's paano ba ito? There's influence coming from both ends. So the contemporary Western might appropriate. Ito nakikita natin sa fashion, mas madali, no? Na traditional motifs are being used in clothes. At walang issue diyan, no? I mean, hindi siya as problematic as yung sa fine arts, kasi fine arts is more academic yung tingin, no? So there are more questions than sa ano, kasi sa commercial, if it sells or not sells. Tapos how the sales or yung kita was being distributed from the source and the appropriating the material. So that's very difficult also to put inside the classroom. Yung the thin line between what's this, originality and appropriation. Ako as educator and as curator, na mention ko kanina earlier, na I curate for traditional communities, no? So yung natawag nating neocolonialism, no? Decolonizing, mga ganong modes na napakahirap siyang itawid sa mga bata like senior high.
Yeah, thank you, Bing. Abe, your thoughts?
Hindi ako nakaturo sa senior high, pero all of us humanities division sa Ateneo de Davao, we teach introduction to art appreciation sa mga students that are non-artists and non-designers, so mga engineers, entrepreneurs, accountants, nurses, ano pa ba? Business, so mga ganon yung mga ano ng students. So syempre pag pupunta ng library, syempre yung mga libro doon, the books are Western based, so they get this point of views from these books, or if they search the internet, they would get these views. But so ang ginagawa namin is that the first examples na binibigay namin when we discuss or define art is how it is defined in the region. Pero isi-supplement siya ng Western mode of looking at art as well. So parang ang pina-prioritize namin sa curriculum is to highlight the point of views of the people, how they view themselves, how they view their practices. So isang exercise na ginagawa namin sa class would be, pre-pandemic pa ito kasi nung umalis ako for postgrad studies, pre-pandemic, we asked them to go to Aldevinco, yung parang nagbebenta ng mga traditional objects, para siyang sa tourist market. Pero sabi namin, you could also go there and ask about the histories of these objects. So pupunta sila doon, tatawid lang sila across the road and talk to people. So isang way yon na to reinforce that ang art hindi it's not just decided by the art world na confined to galleries or museums. So there are also spaces that present this. So So sinasabi namin na why do you have these diverse points of view? So papasok din diyan yung histories ng community, how these people are formed, how they are exposed to it. So maraming kumbaga for sa Mindanao region, or maybe including the Philippines, there are parallel kumbaga strains of viewing art making that straddle, maybe it's a traditional, nagsastraddle din siya sa contemporary art making, yung mga recent na ginagawa ngayong 20th and 21st century na mga pieces na wala siyang continuity. It's a new creation. So ganun yung na namin sa kanila, na you really have you have to see these works balik ulit doon sa mga how the creators viewed this work. So ganun yung namin sa that's how we tell the students. Then in the end of the course, in the end they will do an art talk. So they would mine their personal experiences, they would mine their own communities, kasi most of the students in Ateneo pre-pandemic na experience ko is 40% most likely are not coming from Davao. They come from other regions of Mindanao that study there. So doon mo makikita na they would realize in the end na even though they are taught art appreciation as viewers, as an audience, as looking in the end they become a participant, that they are also culture bearers. So wherever they go in Mindanao, wherever they present themselves, maybe sa cuisine, body language, the language, so mga ganon, attitudes, it reflects back to their own culture. So parang ganon yung namin, premise of making them understand why there are different points of view sa art, even in the region of Mindanao.
Yeah, being noted some very relevant issues, but I think what underscores this perhaps dilemma would be the ethical, aesthetic, or the ethical positions we take. No, what ethical values do we hold on to as curators, as artists, as educators? I think that's quite a very pertinent issue. Thank you, Abe. For the Department of Art Studies, I think we've moved away from the art appreciation courses, and now we call our general education courses critical perspectives, in the arts. So I think that's also quite relevant. I will read through another question from one attendee. Since it's election season, do you think the government must start looking into the funding support for arts and culture groups? Must it also start providing avenues for arts in far-flung places like a cultural arts center? Cris answered, government should engage in meaningful conversations with art groups and stakeholders. I agree to this very much, understanding their needs and where support can be provided. So I think in such contexts as regional art scenes, we should also pay attention to who speaks for the local artists, whose voices can we hear, who speaks for them, what kind of conversations are facilitated. Kasi importante ding tingnan yung dynamics na yun eh. And as an outsider, how do we position ourselves within that dynamics? Sino ang pinapakinggan natin? What kind of voices do we allow to be heard, in that context? So I think that's a very crucial position that curators and organizers for events such as an art fair can take. Let me just finish Chris's answer to the question. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. So we should, I think this goes back to what I earlier mentioned on being both expansive, but also being very specific. So I think Chris's mic is working now.
Okay.
So pakinggan natin ang magandang boses ni Cris Rollo na na-miss natin kanina.
Hi, Cris.
Hello, Cris.
Yeah, thanks. Finally, when it's about to end. But, I was listening to the conversation, and I think it's very important. I just would like to highlight that the art community is an ecosystem. So it's not just government, it's not just artists, it's not just the art market, it's not just educators or even the art writers. It's a living ecosystem. If one is not one part of that is sick, then it affects the whole, the whole ecosystem. So it would be good to really look at the different parts and that it functions healthily. We have a good art education system, good art writers, art critics who can, who can put in check art practice and even the art market, and an educated art market that do not that supports and not create dysfunctions within the market. And so, and of course, artists that are ethical and educators that really cater to and evolve with the needs of the times, keeping art relevant. And the community, I think, is very important because art ultimately issues from and is based on community experience. And I think the richness of the art community will also depend on the community itself, no, where it thrives, and therefore it's very important to have that strong connection with our communities, because we are there for them, they are there for us, and they're also part of the community. As I always say, each one of us is an artist. Sometimes others are more expressive than the others, but we all share all that creative impulse, and that's our common, what's common among all of us. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. I think we have 5 minutes or so left. Maybe we can take turns to answer one last question from our audience. Mindanao art is very deep and diverse due to its traditions and cultures. How can we make art a bridge for people in Manila to engage more with the art world in Mindanao and the political climate or the current political climate, especially with what's happening with Lumad communities? So maybe briefly, we can just take turns. Maybe I can start with Cris because he has done extensive work on the field, both as a cultural organizer and advocate and with his work for UN Habitat. And then Bing after Cris, and Abe next, Abe last rather. Okay. Yes, Cris.
Yeah. Actually, me, having worked with, well, I'm now working with UN Habitat and really working with communities. I think art is very important in terms of um, looking at the more holistic human development. Sometimes we see that there are needs that the community needs for food, for environment, for shelter. But unless we really cater to the whole human person, and that means enriching also, the whole human experience through arts and culture, looking at all the angles. Um, that's why it's very important that in my work, I really engage and I really integrate the cultural aspects and cultural sensitivities in all our projects.
Thank you, Chris. Bing?
Naman, no, I think the thing that makes it inaccessible is we exoticize it. Art lang din naman siya. I mean, it's an expression. Natin it's traditional, it's IP art, it's contemporary, it's Western art. Parang ganyan, no? So, nagiging exotic siya. So, parang hindi siya accessible. So, I think we should stop that. Para mas madali na hindi siya hihiwalay. Napag-usapan niya namin ni Patrick Flores before. Like, bakit ang Gamaba sa national artist na pareho lang naman din siyang art? Di ba? Iba lang talaga ang mode. So, hindi natin siya exoticize. So, hindi rin natin i-compartmentalize.
And perhaps,
It becomes accessible to everybody.
Yeah, and perhaps as culture advocates, we can also start to rethink, the categories that we've inherited, all these categories between, or perhaps rethink the categories that we ourselves employ. Abe?
Yes. Siguro pag nasa Mindanao ka, you would hear a lot of slogans like culture of peace. So how do you operationalize yung mga slogans? So maybe, for example, sa culture of peace, gawin nating verb, culture of making peace. So how do you operationalize that in art making and in looking at arts from different peoples, no, sa Mindanao, whether indigenous or Moro or the new Mindanaoans na pinanganak in the 20th century in the region na nagpa-practice ng art. So how do you operationalize that? So most of the people, so pag individual, walang problema, pero once you overlap with other cultures, so people will tend to collaborate. Maybe when you treat your partners in different realms of art making, maybe you treat them as you treat yourself. Like if you give yourself that recognition, why don't you give the recognition similarly to other practitioners, no? Ganon lang yon, no? So babalik dun sa ethics, babalik yun sa ethos mo, how you work about it. So ganon siya. So isang maganda siguro, I think, would be, I don't know, maybe a residency program. Kasi napansin ko rin there are also artists from other parts of the Philippines that are interested to work with communities in Mindanao. So maybe that could be a cue for even Mindanao-based artists to also maybe think of such similar program or projects that could initiate engagements and interactions that could talk about who we are through art practices or creative art practices sa region. So yun siya.
Thank you, Abe. So siguro importante din na i-highlight natin yung idea na art making is not just churning out
Yes.
artwork one after another. It's also about the kind of conversations that we organize, the kind of discourse or the kind of knowledge that we make, or produce, by way of art. Okay. There's someone from the audience who is raising his hand. Cris Gomez, I think, wants to ask a question. Yes, Therese. Therese? Okay. Therese, I don't want to miss questions from the audience. Is Cris Gomez from the audience ready to ask a question to our panel members? Sige, radio silence tayo.
Maybe the internet in the office is fluctuating. There. Okay. So
Okay. Ano daw?
we're sending.
Sending Cris a prompt. Okay, so maybe we can round out the discussion with this final question from the audience. But I'd like to say that parang bitin na bitin yung yung oras na mayroon tayo para pag-usapan itong mga issues na ito, no? Cris is here. Okay. Mukhang nagkakalituhan kami sa chat box.
Ibang Cris.
Okay, ibang Cris ito. This is Cris from Cagayan de Oro City with Gomez for a surname. Sige. Okay, ano ang ating tanong?
I think he declined.
Okay, sige. I think, that took too long. But anyhow, it was good for to touch base with you once more. I hope I can visit Mindanao again, and I hope there will be more opportunities to partner with colleagues and friends in Mindanao. Thank you, Din Din, and the organizers of the art fair for this series of talks. I think this is much needed, as well as future conversations on collateral programs of organized by platforms such as the fair, like the residencies, for example, that would parang encourage conversations, not just about the art market, but as Rollo mentioned, this entire ecology, that is the regional art worlds, and I say art worlds in the Philippines. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us and to making this conversation as lively as possible. I turn you over for a final note. I turn you over to Din Din. I think, Din Din, there's a reminder for everyone.
Yeah, we have to.
Photo.
For that, I'd like to thank everyone, Tessa, Abe, Bing, and Cris for making it, no, despite the difficulty in connecting. No, it was great to hear you, and thank you for sharing the chart that really showed the challenges and what was actually happening. Well, we're hoping that this conversation today and the participation of Panit Bukog and Lawig Diwa in the art fair can hopefully we can hopefully find ways to continue working together. This could be the start of something. With that being said, can we pose for a photo? Yeah.
Hi everyone, please give us your biggest smile. 3, 2, 1, smile. One more. 3, 2, 1, smile. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Mhm. Thank you. Mhm.
Well, everyone, bye-bye.
Okay, the Art Fair Philippines would like to acknowledge its education partners, Ateneo Art Gallery, Museum Foundation of the Philippines, and the Embassy of Spain in the Philippines. Please also join us for another talk this evening in conversation with Leroy New and Eliza Victoria, who made work for the AR Art Trail through data. That's at 7 p.m. tonight. Yeah. Thank you.